we protected him more and did more for him, which actually enabled him to become less, right? So we were the cause of his lack of growth, right? We weren't helping, we were hurting him. And one day I said, we're going to change. And I started telling everybody around him, I need you to stop treating my son like he's got special needs. I need you to treat him like he's special, like he's gifted.
That's Nik Nikic, a father of 2 young adults, one of whom, Chris, has Down syndrome. Nik has developed a method to help Chris achieve incredible goals, like being a triathlon athlete and a public speaker. It's a great story, and it's all on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Here's our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
So let's listen in now on this conversation between Special Father Nik Nikic and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Nik Nikic of Maitland, Florida, who is the father of 2, a business owner who had a recent epiphany to help his son who has Down syndrome unlock his potential. Nik, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You and your wife, Patty, have been married for 34 years and are the proud parents of Jackie, 30, and Christopher, 20, who has Down syndrome. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Sure. I was born and raised in Montenegro. My parents, at the age of 10, decided to move. We lived in a small rural village, didn't really have anything. And we wanted to experience the American dream. So they got a visa. We came to the U.S. and started our life here at the age of 10.
So when you moved from Montenegro, which I recall is Yugoslavia, for those that might be geographically challenged like myself, where was it that you came into the U.S.?
So we flew into New York. We had some other family that had made it here before us, helped us get settled in. We ended up living in the Bronx in New York. My parents went out and got a job. My mother got a job cleaning office buildings at night from 6 at night till 4 or 5 in the morning. And my father worked in apartment buildings, essentially doing physical labor, cleaning, fixing things. They were both limited in terms of their education, both 4th grade educated farmers. So their life was one of just physical labor. And they chose to work in different time zones to make sure that one of them was always home with us to make sure that we stayed on the right track.
Wow, that's a huge commitment. You don't see parents doing that much today. I can only imagine what it'd been like being your parents, immigrating to the United States. I recall that you were the oldest of the 3 siblings. So if you were 10, they would have been a few years younger than you, maybe having to learn a new language, learn a new culture, and basically restart. It sounds like an amazing journey.
Yeah, it's fascinating. In hindsight, the first year when you come to a new country, everything's a blur because you don't understand anything. It's a completely new language. Through immersion, you start to pick things up a little bit at a time. And that's how it was for us. My brothers and I picked it up within a year. My parents seemed to struggle for 20 or 30 years. Even today, my mom's still alive and she speaks very well. But it took her much longer to get acclimated and get comfortable.
Yeah, well, thanks for clarifying that. You had mentioned your dad or both your parents didn't have more than a 4th grade education. Is your dad still alive? What did he do while he was here in the U.S.?
Yeah, so my dad was a superintendent and fixed things in buildings. That was his job. He passed away almost 30 years ago now.
Oh my gosh.
Yep, my mom's still alive.
How would you describe your relationship with your dad?
It was interesting. My father, not having the education, right, was interesting because it didn't take long for me, from an education perspective, to learn more and to know more. But in terms of his example, it was amazing. Sorry about that. I still get choked up thinking about him.
That's amazing. And since he's been gone for almost 30 years, it just is a testimony to the influence that he had in your life.
Yeah, for sure. He was an amazing man. Essentially, he was the love for his family and for us, and the sacrifices he was willing to make for us is really what I got out of our relationship the most. I knew he would do anything in the world for us.
Yeah, well, not having known him beyond the conversations we've had, it's very clear that he was a very courageous person to be able to move his family from one country to the next and start over with very limited, educational background. And it sounded like both your parents had an amazing work ethic, right? They were very dedicated to providing for you and your brothers. And sometimes it's not the words that they speak, but the example that they leave that is more impactful. And it sounds like your dad was one of those, sort of the actions speak louder than words type of person.
Oh, absolutely. Both my parents were like that. They were committed to hard work, to doing the right thing. They taught us that. They taught us to dream. I remember my mom from back in Yugoslavia when I was in the 5th and 6th grade, she sat me down, and I still remember as if it was yesterday. And she said, "Someday you're going to be an engineer."
Oh my God.
She said, "You got to work hard, you got to study, and you're going to be an engineer, and you're going to be successful." And she planted that in my brain from when I could remember back in the village. And lo and behold, 20 years later, or 15, 16 years later, I ended up going to Johns Hopkins. I got a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. And it's amazing the power of planting seeds in someone's mind, and then talking to them about what they can do and helping them see the vision of what's possible and setting them in the right direction. And both my parents did that, and they put us on the right path, and they believed in us, and they encouraged us to just study hard and work hard to achieve our dreams.
Yeah, well, that's fabulous. Thank you for sharing. Out of curiosity, did either of your grandfathers on your dad or your mom's side play a role in your life?
Yeah, between the age of 0 to 6, I actually lived with my grandmother and my great-grandfather on their farm because my parents couldn't afford to feed me. They had their hands full just, taking care of my 2 little brothers. So I spent quite a few years just living with my grandmother and great-grandfather. So he was a big influence. So was my grandmother.
Wow.
And then, by the age of 6, my parents were a little bit better off. And then I moved back and lived with them.
Okay.
So things were pretty rough back then.
I was going to say, it sounds like you came from some pretty humble or very modest beginnings.
Yeah, when I was between 6 and 10, I lived in a house that we had on our farm that my father and his brothers built, basically collecting, rocks from around the mountain. And then they essentially built what was about a 10 by 16 foot house, one room for the 5 of us. No running water, no electricity, no anything. It was just, kind of like a hut. That's how we lived for 3 or 4 years before we moved to the U.S.
Wow. That is amazing. Well, again, thank you for sharing. And, I think that part of what keeps people grounded is knowing where they came from and the humility that goes along with that as well.
Thank you.
So you mentioned that you went to school at Johns Hopkins. You took a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. And I'm wondering, where did your career take you from there?
Someone told me that if I got into technical sales, I could make a lot more money a lot faster than if I went into engineering. And I had a much better long-term career. So I actually got into sales right out of college. Because I'm an engineer, I'm very logical. And so sales was never logical to me, but I became a really ardent student of it. I started studying the cause and effect of sales and how to actually make it more tangible. And over about a 10-year period, I started to document and figure out how sales actually worked to the point where the last 4 or 5 years, I experienced enormous success. And I got to a point where I said, look, I could teach other people how to do this. This is actually pretty easy now. And that's when I left the corporate world and became a sales transformation consultant.
And what's the name of your business?
Sales optimizer.
Okay. I'd like to switch gears and talk about special needs, first on a personal level and then beyond. So before Chris was born, did you and Patty have any experience with special needs?
Zero. We didn't even understand it. And when Chris was born, we had no idea what Down syndrome was. Once we got over the shock and the lack of understanding, we started to dig in and try to understand what the new world meant for us. And so we kind of learned, like everybody else, by listening to experts from day one.
Was there any meaningful advice that you got early on that was instrumental looking back on it now?
Well, in hindsight, no. At the time, we thought so. And we kept following a lot of the advice. But in hindsight, based on what I've learned over the last couple of years, some of the biggest mistakes we ever made was actually listening to the advice and the experts that we were given.
Wow. That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah. So as a young person, we tried to get him included. We tried to have him go through school. We tried to get him to participate in sports, different environments to help him become part of the community. It was just very difficult trying to figure out how to get him to fit into the world. And quite honestly, he just never fit. It was always kind of like just dragging him along and trying to make him fit into a world that wasn't designed for him. And we kept trying to do things using the advice we've been given and the knowledge we had about how to navigate this world. The problem is someone with Down syndrome can't navigate the same world we navigate the same way. But nobody knew how to explain to us that there was a different playbook for someone with Down syndrome than the playbook that we were all using. And so, essentially I've experienced about 18 years worth of frustration to get to a point where we started to figure it out. It took me about 10 years to figure out sales. It took me 18 years to figure out Down syndrome.
Wow. Well, it sounds like it's been a hard journey, and it pains my heart to think about it. But at the risk of focusing on the negative, which I don't mean to do, but what were some of the bigger challenges? You made reference to the fact that you tried to have them fit into the schools and the sports, and it just seemed like you were almost going through the motions, but without the results that you were hoping for. Was there anything in particular that comes to mind that you might be able to share with other dads, for that matter, along the journey?
The greatest challenge, number one, was no one really understood how to make it work so that our kids, they try to make them fit in, but for the most part, they're excluded. They don't feel like they're part of anything. And then the other biggest challenge is that everybody has a lack of understanding of how these kids learn and develop and what really works, what doesn't work. And so the frustration that comes from us being on one side trying to accomplish something and everybody else being on another side trying to do the right thing but not really knowing, it causes an awful lot of frustration. It's like two people looking at the same topic from different perspectives, and they're both adamant about their perspective being right, but there is no middle ground. They don't understand each other, and so it turns into a lot of frustration and difficulty for everybody. And neither side can seem to understand the other side. And that happens in life in all kinds of areas, right? The one we happen to experience is with kids with Down syndrome.
Yeah. Were you describing the world of IEP or beyond?
Yes, the world of IEP and how the whole system worked, how much we had to fight to just get little things done. For the first 6 years of his education, we had to go from one school to another because the school he was in just wouldn't work with him. Then we tried another school. And we went through that 6 or 7 times until he got to the 6th grade, and we finally found a small private school in town. And it was a godsend for us because they actually approached things very differently and helped Chris get into a regular class and work with him. And he has been in that school since the 6th grade. He just finished his 12th year graduation, and it has just been an absolute godsend. But the first 6 years were almost impossible. In the last 6 or so years, it's been much, much better, and they've worked a lot better with him. But they also, what I learned over the last 2 years is they understood a few things, but also limited him because they also had a perception of what he could and couldn't do. And so they helped him go as far as they thought he could go, which was wonderful. But it wasn't until the last 2 years that I figured out that he could go so much further and that there was a different approach to getting him there.
Yeah. Well, I'm saddened to learn that it took that many years to find a suitable educational solution, and to hear that he has made a lot of progress, even though he might have plateaued as a result of what you were just talking about. I'm sort of curious to know, were there any organizations beyond the educational environment, Special Olympics, et cetera, that Chris was involved in that helped him develop on a personal basis?
So Special Olympics was a wonderful organization because it gave him a place to go be part of a group. Mm-hmm. And so it gave him a place to go play golf once a week with a group, to go to regionals and state tournaments, and he can be with others like him. So it gave him a place to belong. From my perspective, Special Olympics is an absolutely phenomenal organization that gives kids with physical and intellectual disabilities an opportunity to belong where they don't belong in other places. And so it becomes a safe haven for them to be part of something. And so that was a godsend for us with Chris. Since the age of 9 or 10, he would participate in different Special Olympics events. And it was just a wonderful thing for him to be part of.
Well, that's probably where the seeds of his athleticism began, right?
Absolutely. And a couple of years ago, 3 years, almost 2.5 years ago, Special Olympics decided to sponsor and do a pilot program in Florida to start a triathlon program. Somebody had the vision to say, let's have a triathlon event for Special Olympics. We were one of, I think, 4 kids, right? 4 people who decided to be part of that pilot program the first year. It was just an interesting way to get involved in that and get this process started. So we attribute and are grateful to the Special Olympics community for even having a vision to start something like that. That gave someone like Chris the opportunity, and it planted a seed that kind of got us started.
That's a fabulous story. Thank you. I'm sort of curious, having a little triathlon experience myself, having done about 20 of these, but from a much later age than Chris. I started at 28, took a decade off, did another one at 38, did a couple of years for the next decade, and haven't done a triathlon in maybe a decade, which concluded then at age 49 with the Ironman Wisconsin. So I'm sort of intrigued by your story, Chris's story. I'm sort of curious to know, what's the challenge? Is it the swimming, the biking, the running? What's the biggest challenge for him?
So it's interesting. The bike is the biggest challenge because it's affected by many of the disabilities that are naturally inherent in a child with Down syndrome. Someone with Down syndrome can't balance very well. So it took almost 6 months of holding him on a bike for him to actually learn how to ride a bike and balance himself.
Wow.
And he rode very slowly. And so when he first started this, that was the biggest challenge. Now, the others were a challenge too, just because low muscle tone and low physical ability, makes it hard to run, hard to swim. But those didn't have the other challenge of balance. And then, of course, the risk that comes with riding a bike, right? The crash and fall that comes from lack of balance and if you start going too fast. So the bike was by far the biggest barrier and the one that we really focused on trying to tackle.
Out of curiosity, at what age did he learn how to ride a bike?
So he started learning at 16. And then what happened was he ended up having 4 major ear surgeries between 16 and 18. So he became completely inactive. He ended up gaining somewhere around 30 or 40 pounds, something like that. So he got a little bigger, he gained a lot of weight, and he became very sedentary. And then after his ear surgeries and the doctor said he can start to get back to some normal activity, what was fascinating was the doctor said no more swimming because of the ear problems.
Oh.
Yeah, we decided to get him back into and say, look, let's get into that triathlon pilot, and we're going to figure out everything. And we did. And so he kind of knew how to ride because we taught him when he was like 16, but we had to kind of teach him all over again when he was 18. And so the last 2 years, he's been really, really learning how to ride. So he went from where he could ride a bike 2 years ago at about 6 or 7 or 8 miles an hour at a nice steady speed around the block to now where he can go up, up to speeds of 27, 28 miles an hour.
Wow, that's amazing. Truly amazing. Out of curiosity, during the last couple of years since he's been more focused on triathlon, what type of events, what distances has he done? How many races has he done?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, we started with what they call a mini sprint, right? Started with like a couple 100-yard swim, I think 3 or 4 mile bike and about a 1 mile run. And then we graduated to a sprint triathlon, which is collectively up to 13 miles. And we did that, over the last couple of years. And then back in January of this year, he graduated to a Olympic triathlon, which is 32 or 33 miles in total. So that was January of this year. And then by May, 4 or 5 months later, he graduated to a half Ironman, which is 70.3 miles.
That is an amazing and very high trajectory. Just knowing a little bit about triathlon like I have, it sounds like well beyond anybody's expectations. But if that wasn't enough, I understand that now that he's got the half Ironman under his belt, his next focus, his next milestone is to do a full Ironman.
Absolutely. So he has signed up for the Florida Ironman on November 7th. So he has approximately 21 weeks between now and then. And we have him on a plan. And as astounding as that sounds, the progression he's made, when we break it down in the plan we developed for him, all he's really done is he's just improved 1% a day. The difference between him and everybody else is everybody else takes breaks and they slow down and they take time off. He just hasn't taken any time off for the last year. He's just been improving 1% a day for a year. And now he's going to improve 1% a day for the next 4 months, 5 months, and he's going to go from 70 to 140 miles. It's not that hard when you break it down that way. And so with Chris, he knows that, let's say he did 50 miles or 60 miles riding last week. This week, he's going to do 65 or 66. It's no big deal to him because it's only 5 more than what he did last week. It's not like he's doing 65. He's just doing 5 more. And so in his mind, everything is just 1 more. It's not 140 miles. It's just 1 more than 139. And essentially, that's what's burned into his brain now. And so every day he wakes up, he's got his plan, he executes, and his goal is to get 1% better today than he was yesterday.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing story. You make it sound so simple. And having a little triathlon experience, you need to build in some off days, right? You get fatigued, maybe you get sick, you get cold or flu or something, or, you need to build in a little cushion because it's really hard to stay on a really, really tight schedule because life gets in the way sometimes.
Yep.
But I'm so inspired to hear about the story, the discipline that goes in behind this. And thank you again for sharing. I'm looking forward to meeting you. We both have signed up for Ironman Florida. I'm hoping to be there, that they don't cancel. And I've taken a little bit different challenge. One of the things that I've done as a result of some of these interviews is I met a fellow in Virginia Beach. His name is Rooster Rossiter, and his daughter Ainsley had a rare degenerative disease. And before she passed away at age 12, they had done 100 mostly running races. And they had created this charity in her name called Ainsley's Angels. And they basically get able-bodied people like you and I to push people that might not otherwise be able to participate in running races. And I was so inspired by the work that Rooster's been doing the last decade that I signed up to do the Napa Valley Marathon with one of my daughters a year ago, March. And we flew out to California, and I pushed a 29-year-old woman with cerebral palsy from start to finish. And it was one of the most energizing experiences I've ever had. It was a transformative experience. And after that, I said to myself, I don't know if I ever want to do another marathon, half marathon, triathlon by myself, right? Because it was so much more meaningful to do it with somebody else. I did the same thing in January of this year down in Louisiana half marathon. I pushed a 9-year-old fella with what looks like cerebral palsy, but it is something different. And I'm hoping to be able to do the same when we get to Ironman Florida, which is to swim with, bike with and run with somebody who wouldn't otherwise be able to participate. So we'll each be taking on a challenge that, we're not totally prepared for. And I'm going to try to incorporate your 1% philosophy into my training going forward. So again, thanks for sharing that, Nick.
Well, Chris wouldn't be able to do what he's doing if he didn't have someone like you actually helping him. So he has his partner, unified partner, who's doing it with him and who is helping Chris, right? He's side by side with Chris to encourage him and to keep him on track and to help him if he needs any help along the way. Because someone like Chris isn't going to be able to go swim in the ocean for 2.4 miles on their own without somebody watching him. So he's going to have someone next to him with a tether to make sure, he can't get too far away from him. And then the rest of the race is just having someone by his side. And so Dan Grebe, who is really stepped in and taken a big role in helping Chris do this, is kind of a little bit like you. He's done 7 or 8 Ironmans, and he's told us one of his greatest joys now is helping Chris do what he's doing. And when he's done that, then he's going to be done. But he's kind of saying the same thing you are. His joy now comes from helping someone else accomplish something that they couldn't do on their own. And we need more people like that. A lot of other kids like Chris who could use someone like that.
Yeah, well, my hat's off to Dan. Now, would you describe Dan as the coach, or is there somebody else that's actually coaching?
No, so Dan is the unified partner. So he does the races and some of the training with him. Chris has another unified partner, Simone, who actually started doing the sprints with him until Chris got too fast for her and she couldn't keep up with him. Then we graduated to Dan. But she still trains with him because he absolutely loves her and she makes everything fun. But his coach is Hector Torres. He's a level 3, what they call level 3 Ironman coach. He coaches top level professionals. He's got a swim coach who teaches them swim lessons. And then he's got a stretch coach at the gym who has stepped in to teach him how to stretch. And so people have kind of come out of everywhere to volunteer and help Chris. And it's been a wonderful community that has created a welcoming environment and one of inclusion, where now Chris feels like he's part of something where before the last couple of years he hasn't been.
That's amazing. Yeah, well, I think of these people as the angels that show up in people's lives. So my hat's off to Simone and Hector and Dan for being part of what I'll call Team Chris.
I believe that when God puts a big dream in someone's heart, he also sends angels to help them.
Yep, we're on the same page. I think I saw a video Chris was in, and there was a Ironman t-shirt. It says Down Syndrome Ironman t-shirt. And I think the phrase on the back of the t-shirt was something along the lines of, let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. I was really moved by that.
That's the Special Olympics. That's their motto. So he got that from Special Olympics.
So we've talked about Chris's experience leading up to the Ironman here in November. And I know that Chris has been doing some other things, and I'm wondering if you can speak to the public speaking that he's been doing and what's his message.
Sure. So the dream was to be like everybody else, be independent. I asked Chris, what do you want? What's your dream? And he literally sat down and wrote down, he said, I want my own car, my own house, and I want my own wife. And he was very specific. He said, I want a smoking hot blonde wife from Minnesota like my dad got. He essentially wants the same life that I have, right? So he looks around and he says, I want 2 kids, a daughter and a son. I want a house like you. I want a car like yours, and I want a wife like yours. And so in order to accomplish that, we needed to figure out a way to help him earn his way, right? He had to do something. And so when we first started, we only started the triathlon as a way to get him involved in exercise. It wasn't until about a year into it, as we started working on this 1% concept, that I realized there was something else possible here. So I had this epiphany in terms of what was really going on. And I was learning as Chris went along. And what we learned was this 1% concept and how well it works, because it's simple enough for Chris to understand. It's simple enough for him to do it. And it's simple enough for him to explain it. Then I had this thought, this is what I teach in the corporate world. Why not have him be the example of what 1% looks like, right? Everybody talks about a strategy for success. And so I looked at Chris and said, look, he could be someone who could actually be a spokesperson for how you can achieve any dream that you have if you're willing to work hard enough. if you just focus on getting 1% better each day. So I had a client where I was rolling out the 1% better. It was actually a company called Huffman Mifflin out of Chicago, the publisher. They're in the education business. So I was doing the training for their whole sales organization, about 1,000 people in Orlando. And I said to the executives, I said, hey, would you do me a favor? And I said, what? I said, look, and I showed them what Chris did in terms of a triathlon and the 1% and how it worked. And I said, would you give him 5 minutes on stage to explain this concept? And that's how it started. So it took 3 or 4 weeks, once they agreed to do it, for me to write up a 5 or 6 minute speech for Chris. And then we applied the 1% concept in him learning his speech. And so we said, look, you're going to learn 1 sentence today, 1 sentence tomorrow, and a month from now, you're going to be able to deliver a 5 or 6 minute speech. So we now applied the 1% concept from his exercise to his speaking. And lo and behold, he just started learning. And then he delivered that 6 minute speech. And I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but it was a standing ovation. It was something to behold. It was an amazing speech. And then it was something to behold. It was an amazing speech. And then we just kept expanding that. So he got invited to speak to other places, and now he can deliver a 20-minute speech from memory. And the speech is essentially on this concept of how can you achieve your full God-given potential simply by willing to get 1% better each day and staying on task until you achieve it. And that's what his speech is about.
Yeah, well, like you said, it's a simple concept to understand. It's simple to explain. And I think that the difference is, like a lot of things that are simple, it's just in the execution of it, right? Now, if you understand something, now you have to apply yourself and execute that strategy. So I'm so inspired by this. I'm hoping our listeners, other parents, moms and dads, will be able to get the message, not when their son or daughter is 18, but maybe at 12 or 10 or 8 or 6 or maybe earlier, so that they can start to plant these seeds and that their experience will be even better than your experience has been, just as a result of intervening at an earlier point in time.
Yeah. So the biggest thing I learned, right, the real epiphany that hit me, I can't even pronounce the word, but what I finally learned through watching Chris in this experience is that we had a lack of understanding of how someone with Down syndrome develops. We kept comparing Chris to a typical child. And when I realized that his learning curve was the exact opposite of a typical child, now I understood why we kept failing, because we kept trying to fit him into the typical curve when he really needed to follow a different curve. But the curve ends up in the same place. But what it does is it confuses everybody, because the perception is that the curve he's on will never get him to the place where he wants to go. And so we as parents keep trying to put our kids with Down syndrome on the same curve as a typical child, and we get frustrated and we fail. A typical development curve, just to compare a triathlon, for instance, right? If you put two 18-year-olds on a path who neither could do very much, right, in terms of a triathlon, and if you started training them to do a triathlon or an Ironman, a typical child, their curve goes up really fast, right? So their curve goes up, and then it begins to flatten out because you start to hit your potential. And over a 3 to 6 to 12 month period, a typical child will hit their peak curve pretty quickly. The problem with someone with Down syndrome is their curve is long and flat for about a year. And when most people look at that, their interpretation is that he'll never get to the end result. Well, what's happening is during that year, they're building a foundation, one that actually then within a year turns into like a hockey puck curve, and it gets them almost to the same place. So in 2 years, Chris got to a half Ironman, as would a typical child without Down syndrome. That typical child without Down syndrome might do the half Ironman in, say, 6 hours, but Chris needed 8.5 hours. But the end result is they both got it done. They just took a different path. When I learned that, now I understood why everybody was failing, because everybody was approaching it the wrong way. So I had to educate all his coaches and everybody around him to think differently and to let Chris develop. using a different curve than everybody else. And I assured them that if he followed the curve I was having him on, he would get to the same place. Now, nobody believed me because their world never saw anything like that. The curve everybody understood is the one that we see all the time. That was the greatest lesson learned in this entire journey. And so I believe now I can teach any parent with a child with Down syndrome, if they're willing to follow a 1% plan, to understand that their curve is about a year or two longer than the typical child. But once they get on that curve and start to build momentum, the results will be astounding. And that's why Ironman is so important and why public speaking is so important, because it's two examples where someone with Down syndrome is going to be able to do something that they never had any business even attempting, but he's going to be able to do both of those at a pretty high level, following a different curve from a typical child.
Yeah, very powerful. Again, thank you for sharing. You make it sound so simple, but I think that the realization is that if you keep doing the same thing and expect different results, that's the basic definition of insanity. So you need to take a different approach. And that's what I heard you saying, is that the 1% approach is a much longer, right, drawn out approach, right, which doesn't seem common. But, if you've got the attributes that somebody with Down syndrome does with low muscle tone, balance issues, you have to take a longer term approach to this. So I'm hoping that this message about the 1% approach is one that sticks, and that Chris is just going to be one of many individuals who is proof in the pudding that this is their reality, right? And we're going to break down these paradigms that people have been operating within for decades or perhaps generations now.
And here we have an excerpt from an interview that Chris did with the voice of Ironman, Mike Riley.
You have a big whiteboard in your bedroom, and there's so much writing on it. Do you write on the whiteboard every day?
Yes. Every day I write down what I did so I can see that I'm working hard, but I also read my goals and dreams every day from my board to remind myself why I'm doing the work.
So I'm wondering, under the banner of advice, and you've certainly shared some advice already, if there's anything else that you'd like to say as it relates to raising a child with different challenges, or whether that be physical or intellectual.
Sure. One of the biggest lessons I learned as I started to realize what was possible is I realized, I've got two children. One is 30 and Chris is 20. I realized that for the first 18 years of Chris's life, I treated Chris differently than I treated Jackie. And so the result was different. And one day, over the last year or so, it hit me that I asked myself, if Chris was born a typical child, what would his life be like? And I started thinking, well, he'd probably be about 6'8" or 9. He'd probably be playing college basketball at this point. I would have at the gym at 6 a.m, training hard, right? And all of a sudden I started thinking about that and saying, if that's what I would have done with him if he didn't have Down syndrome, then why am I not treating him the same way having Down syndrome, the way I treated my daughter? And I helped my daughter, become a successful basketball player in college and all that. But I treated her differently. I treated her as gifted, and I treated him as special. And what that meant was we protected him more and did more for him, which actually enabled him to become less. Right? So we were the cause of his lack of growth, right? We weren't helping, we were hurting him. And one day I said, we're going to change. And I started telling everybody around him, I need you to stop treating my son like he's got special needs. I need you to treat him like he's special, like he's gifted. And lo and behold, look what he's done. In the last 6 months, he's become somewhat of a global celebrity, and he's accomplished things nobody ever thought were possible. He's got speaking engagements, coming from different places. Different people are sponsoring him. I mean, it's amazing what he's accomplished once we actually started to believe that he was gifted and we let him pursue that gift.
Very inspiring. I'm sort of curious to know, why is it you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
Well, life goes quick, and I find the greatest joy in life is actually doing something that makes a difference for someone else. I've seen it with Chris, and I see it on the flip side. I see kids everywhere who don't have that guidance. And so they end up living a life of either isolation or less than their potential, and then struggling with all the difficulties. If we can, either through our example or through some kind of program or something, if we can actually just do something to give people some direction, right, and some hope that they can control their own future and they can achieve so much more than they've been told. And if we can turn someone's life around, like people have done for me, where, like Father Sullivan and others throughout my life have stepped in and given me advice and kind of guided me. Sometimes people just need a little bit of direction, a little bit of hope, a little bit of an example of what's possible. And once you spark that flame a little bit and get people thinking about their possibilities, it helps them change their world, right? I'm never going to do anything to change the world. But if I can help my son to become the best he can be, maybe he can make a difference in someone else's life, and then maybe that'll cascade, around the world and make a difference for a lot of other people. So, from my perspective, it's as I get older, how can we do something to leave the world a little bit better place than when we got here, and make a difference for someone who may be able to transfer it on, because in this new world, my son's going to be living here for the next 40 or 50 or 60 years, and I want him to be in a place where he's making a difference and he's included, and others, he can benefit from others and vice versa.
That's fabulous. Thank you for being the inspiration that you are. If somebody wants to learn more about Chris, his speaking, follow his triathlon journey, or just to contact you, what's the best way to go do that?
So we created a website for Chris as a place for people to follow him and learn, and we're gonna create it more and more as an educational place. So we're gonna start adding more content there for parents with special needs and others who want to learn more, and we're gonna be creating more and more content for them, which we're gonna put on our site and make available to everybody. And then they can always contact us through the site. We're just getting started. This is all fairly new. Chris only did the Olympic Ironman in January, and it's only June now. So this is all very new to us. It's moving really, really fast, and we're trying to figure out how to create a platform that can benefit other people. And so we're starting with our website. And his website is in his name, chrisnikic.com.
Okay, we'll make sure to include that in the show notes so that it'll be easy for everybody to receive that.
And then from there, they can go to his social media sites right from the website.
Excellent. Nik, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Nik is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor, father, or seeking the advice from a mentor, father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Please consider making a tax-deductible donation. I would really appreciate your support. Please also post a review on iTunes, share the podcast with family and friends, and subscribe so you'll get a reminder when each new episode is produced. Nik, thanks again.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stCenturyDads.org. That's 21stCenturyDads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stCenturyDads.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like us on Facebook and subscribe on iTunes or wherever you listen. The Dad to Dad podcast is produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks for listening.